She just wanted to deposit a check. But instead, she was publicly humiliated, racially profiled, and held like a criminal. What no one in that bank knew was she was the daughter of the man who owned it. The heavy glass doors of Sterling National Bank slid open at exactly 10:15 a.m., and in walked Layla Carter, a poised 14-year-old African-American girl dressed in a navy blazer and plaid skirt. The signature uniform of Westwood Preparatory Academy, one of the top private schools in the region. Layla clutched a neat folder in her arms, her face beaming with a mixture of pride and nerves. Inside was her $5,000 academic scholarship check, a copy of her award letter, and her school ID. She had won this scholarship through outstanding test scores and academic excellence. It was her first solo visit to a bank, a rite of passage. Her father had offered to come along, but Layla had confidently declined. "I need to start doing things like this on my own, Dad," she'd said at breakfast that morning. Her father, Dr. Malcolm Carter, a respected financial analyst and entrepreneur, had smiled from across the kitchen island, sipping his black coffee. "I raised a fearless young lady." No one in that marble-floored bank knew Layla's last name, and that morning it made all the difference. Sterling National was located in Larkridge, a well-to-do suburban community just outside Chicago. Known for its exclusivity, the branch exuded an old money vibe, from the towering mahogany counters to the crystal-clear floors polished to a mirror shine. The smiling family photos in its brochures featured only one kind of customer: white. The branch manager, Clarissa Whitmore, a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and sharper prejudices, was notorious for her client curation. She believed in keeping the bank prestigious, and that meant deciding who belonged and who didn't. Just an hour earlier, Clarissa had reminded a new hire, "We maintain a standard here. Not everyone who walks through those doors deserves service." It wasn't the first time she had said it, and it wouldn't be the last. Layla stood in line, reciting her planned sentence in her head. "I'd like to deposit this check into my account, please." Simple, ordinary, a transaction that should have taken 2 minutes. But what followed was anything but ordinary. When it was finally her turn, Layla stepped up to the teller, a woman named Ms. Raines who wore a fake corporate smile that quickly melted into a scowl as soon as she saw the amount on the check. $5,000, she said, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Where did you get this?" Layla remained calm. "It's an academic scholarship. I can show you the award letter." Ms. Raines squinted at the check, holding it up to the light like it was a counterfeit bill. Without a word, she pressed a button under her desk. Moments later, Clarissa Whitmore appeared beside her, heels clicking against the marble like a warning bell. She took the check without acknowledging Layla. "Another one of these," she muttered. "We've had issues with fake scholarship checks lately, from people like her." Those last 3 words weren't said loudly, but they didn't have to be. Their meaning was clear. The air turned heavy. "I have my ID and documentation," Layla offered, pulling out her school ID and award letter. Clarissa snatched them from her hand. "We'll need to verify these. In the meantime, you'll wait over there." She signaled to Mr. Barnes, the security guard, a large man with a baton on his hip and very little patience. He took Layla by the arm, not roughly but not gently either, and marched her across the bank, away from the counter and customers. He positioned her near the front window, in plain view of everyone, yet completely isolated. "Stand right here. Don't move," he barked. Layla's cheeks burned with humiliation as curious customers stared. Clarissa crossed her arms and smirked. To everyone watching, it looked like Layla was a troublemaker, a scam artist, a child criminal, but she was just a 14-year-old girl trying to deposit her scholarship. As the minutes dragged by, Layla grew restless. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I left my phone at school during study hall. I just need to call my father. He's expecting me." Clarissa didn't even turn her head. "That's not our problem. You'll stay there until we finish, if your documents are even real." Layla's heart pounded. Panic crept in. They had her check, her ID, her scholarship letter, everything. And now, no way to contact anyone. She tried again. Please, I just want to deposit my scholarship check. That's all. Clarissa finally turned around, her voice cold as ice. You look like a fraud. You don't belong here. So I'm making this hard on you, very hard. You'll be lucky if we get to you today. Then she added with a sneer, people like you always find a way to ruin things. That's when Layla made a decision. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't beg. She would observe. She would document. And soon, she would expose them all. Sometimes the moment that changes everything doesn't come with warning. It comes while you're standing in a corner being ignored, underestimated, and watching everything unfold. Layla Carter had now been standing for over an hour. Her legs ached. Her fingers were stiff from clutching the strap of her backpack. Her mouth was dry, but no one offered her water. Not even a glance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while the marble beneath her shoes seemed to pulse with discomfort. And still, Clarissa Whitmore ignored her. Instead, the manager glided through the bank like she owned every inch of it. She laughed with wealthy clients. She personally escorted a retired couple to the VIP lounge, offering them coffee and delicate shortbread cookies on silver trays. A young white man in a golf shirt deposited a $2,000 check and was immediately greeted with, "Let me expedite this for you." Clarissa beamed. He has no idea. Layla pressed a hand to her chest to slow her pounding heart. This wasn't just about her anymore. This wasn't just humiliation. This was corporate espionage. Her father's company, the one that built Community Wealth, provided fair housing loans and created scholarship programs like the very one Layla had earned, was being betrayed from the inside. And the woman doing it was the same one who'd told Layla, "You don't belong here." A white-hot clarity surged through her. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her small, leather-bound notebook. With trembling hands, she began to write. She documented everything: time, dialogue, movements, expressions, every detail. And someone noticed. From behind the teller counter, a young Asian-American bank employee named Maya Lin had been watching. She had seen how Layla had been treated, watched it all with discomfort growing in her eyes. Now she saw Layla writing furiously. At first, Maya said nothing, but when Clarissa and Langford parted ways, when Clarissa escorted him out the side door, Maya's face shifted from uncertainty to resolve. Layla returned to her corner before anyone noticed she had moved. The rest of the afternoon passed like a slow-burning fire. Layla watched more discrimination unfold. A black couple with a mortgage inquiry was redirected to another branch that might better suit your needs. A white teenager under 16 was allowed to open an account, without a guardian. A Latino family was told to expect delays. An elderly black man, folder in hand, sat ignored for 40 minutes. A white mother's child ran loudly through the lobby. Clarissa offered him a lollipop. Layla filled 3 more pages with notes. The injustice was systematic, precise, and invisible, unless you were looking for it. At 3:15 p.m., Maya took her break. But instead of heading to the lounge, she grabbed a stack of brochures and a cleaning cloth. She walked casually across the floor, appearing to tidy up the branch. When she reached Layla's corner, she bent to retrieve a fallen pen and whispered, "Are you okay?" Layla nearly burst into tears. "They took my documents," she whispered. "My check, my ID. I can't call my dad. I left my phone at school." Maya looked around. Then, heart pounding, she slipped her personal phone into Layla's hand, hidden between a brochure and the cloth. "I could lose my job for this," she said, barely audible. "But this isn't right." "Thank you," Layla choked out. "I don't know what to do." "Be quick," Maya warned. "I'll block the camera. Just make the call." Maya stepped between Layla and the security cameras, rearranging the displays. Layla turned, shielding the phone behind her notebook. Layla had just made the call that would change everything. But help wasn't coming fast enough. And the clock was ticking. Dad, they took everything, my ID, my scholarship check. They made me stand in the corner for almost 4 hours. I don't have my phone. I had to borrow someone else's. Layla Carter's voice was a hushed whisper, her fingers trembling as she gripped the cell phone Maya Lynn had just slipped into her hands. Her father's voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Layla, listen to me, Dr. Malcolm Carter said. Where exactly are you? The Sterling National branch on Brookview Avenue. In Larkridge. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched time. And you said you saw Garrett Langford? Malcolm asked, his voice now tinged with a chilling edge. Yes, he met with the manager, Clarissa Whitmore. She gave him a folder marked Confidential Carter Acquisition. It had client lists and timelines. They're planning something, Dad. Dr. Carter's deep breath was audible on the other end. Measured, controlled. The way he always sounded when the stakes were highest. You did the right thing, sweetheart, he said. I want you to stay calm. Don't tell them who you are. My assistant, Miss Laura Benton, is 5 minutes away. I'm getting in the car right now. Don't move. Before Layla could reply, the call disconnected. She tucked the phone back into Maya's hands with a look of gratitude that said more than words. Help is coming, she whispered. Maya nodded and returned to her post. Layla, still trembling, resumed her place by the window, eyes scanning the lobby, her body tense as a loaded spring. At 3:42 p.m., the front doors of Sterling National swung open. A woman in a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit strode in, her stride purposeful, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Laura Benton was tall, confident, and clearly not someone used to being ignored. Clarissa Whitmore appeared from the far hallway just as Laura crossed the lobby. Welcome to Sterling National Bank, Clarissa said smoothly, offering her hand. I'm Clarissa Whitmore, branch manager. How may I assist you today? Laura didn't shake her hand. I'm here regarding an urgent matter involving a minor in your custody. Layla Carter, she said. Her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Clarissa's smile faltered. Oh, the girl with the questionable check? We're still in the process of verifying her information. There were red flags. Laura didn't flinch. She's the daughter of Dr. Malcolm Carter. The blood drained from Clarissa's face. Dr. Malcolm Carter had arrived, and the room would never be the same again. He walked through the bank's front doors, his presence sucking the oxygen from the room. Layla's eyes filled with relief as her father approached her first. You okay? He asked, voice low and warm. She nodded, holding up her notebook. I wrote down everything, every minute. Every word Malcolm nodded once. Then turned slowly toward Clarissa, who was now pale as paper. I believe you've been holding my daughter without cause. Clarissa opened her mouth again, trying to find the right combination of words to escape judgment, but Malcolm didn't wait. Talia Reeves entered moments later, flanked by 2 board members and legal counsel. Several other executives followed, some visibly stunned to be summoned to a local branch. Inside the main conference room, a hush fell as a projector screen lit up. Play the security footage, Malcolm said. His voice was quiet but unchallengeable. And they did. Everyone watched as the screen showed, Layla entering the bank, her polite interaction at the counter, the teller pressing the alarm, the humiliating walk to the corner, nearly 4 hours of footage showing her standing alone, while white customers were guided to private lounges, offered beverages, and smiled upon. The final blow came when the footage showed Clarissa leading Garrett Langford into her office, handing over the confidential file marked Carter Acquisition. No one spoke. Clarissa collapsed into a chair, stunned. Then came Layla's notebook. She stood up, voice steady despite the day's exhaustion. I documented the entire experience. Every time she discriminated against customers, every quote, the time she ignored the policy behind her. She handed it to Laura, who passed it to legal. It matches the video logs perfectly, one of the board members said. Clarissa opened her mouth one last time. I was only following protocol, Talia snapped. Is detaining a child for hours your idea of protocol? Sharing confidential data with a competitor? As Clarissa was escorted out by security, her face showed one final emotion. Not shame, not even guilt, just realization that she had underestimated someone because of her uniform, her age, and her skin. And it had cost her everything. Layla Carter is no longer just a student with a scholarship. She's the spark that set justice in motion. Sometimes it takes one quiet voice to awaken the conscience of a room full of silence. The silence in the conference room at Sterling National Bank was not the peaceful kind. It was heavy, dense, the kind that comes only after the truth crashes through a carefully curated lie. At the center of it all stood Layla Carter, a 14-year-old girl who should have spent the afternoon celebrating her academic achievement. Instead, she had become a witness, a victim, and ultimately a catalyst. But now the attention shifted, not to Layla, but to those around her. Clarissa Whitmore. Clarissa sat stiffly at the end of the table, no longer the composed manager who had strutted across the marble floors earlier that day. Her pearl necklace suddenly felt like a noose. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap as she tried to process the rapid unraveling of her world. Just this morning, she had told her assistant, "Perception is everything in banking." But she had never imagined that the perception she'd so carefully crafted would crumble because of a teenager. She had misjudged Layla, not because she didn't recognize her, but because she didn't care to look. When Clarissa first saw the girl standing at the teller window, she saw a stereotype. Not a scholar, not a person, just a problem. Something to be handled, controlled, dismissed. She had no idea Layla was the daughter of the very man she feared. But as the footage rolled, documenting her behavior, her voice, her choices, Clarissa saw herself through someone else's lens. And she hated what she saw. The problem wasn't that Layla had been important. The problem was that Clarissa hadn't believed she was worth respect, even if she hadn't been. And now she could feel the walls closing in. Maya stood in the back of the room, unnoticed by most, but her heart beat loud in her chest. She had been a teller at Sterling National for just under a year, long enough to know how things worked, long enough to know what not to say, to keep her head down, to stay safe. She had seen what happened to customers like Layla before. Sometimes it was subtle, a longer wait time, a dismissive tone. Other times, like today, it was unmistakable. But Maya had always told herself it wasn't her place, that she couldn't afford to lose her job, that if she spoke up, nothing would change anyway. But today had been different. Layla hadn't cried. She hadn't yelled. She had stood, silently, observing, writing, and that strength had moved Maya in a way she didn't expect. So she broke the rules. She gave her phone. She stood in front of the camera. She shielded the girl no one else would help. Now, as she watched Layla calmly present her evidence, Maya felt something strange bloom inside her. Pride. And maybe hope? Garrett Langford. Garrett Langford sat far from the others, flanked by two corporate investigators. The footage of his covert meeting with Clarissa had been damning. So had the email exchanges, the spreadsheets, the client targeting plans. But what shook him the most wasn't being exposed. It was who had exposed him. A child. A black girl in a school uniform? He hadn't even noticed her in the bank. She hadn't existed in his world until she destroyed it. Langford had always viewed the financial world as a chessboard. Clients were pawns, employees were tools, competitors were enemies to be crushed, and he played to win. But now he was being checkmated by someone who hadn't even been in the game. He stared at Layla across the room and for the first time in his career felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spine. Not fear, not even shame, but the realization that he had underestimated the wrong person. And that would cost him everything. Dr. Malcolm Carter. Dr. Carter didn't move much during the meeting. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. So did the way he looked at his daughter, not with anger or vengeance, but with admiration. He had built his career on data, strategy, and ethics. He believed in financial inclusion. He had bought into Sterling National to make a difference, only to discover that rot was growing within its walls. But today wasn't about him. Today, the real power in the room was 14 years old, held a worn notebook in her hand, and had stood alone in the face of casual cruelty. And she had never wavered. Layla Carter. Layla sat quietly now, her voice no longer needed. She had spoken. She had written. She had exposed the truth. And yet she didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Because for every person who had seen her today, seen what she had endured, there were thousands more who hadn't. There were other girls like her, in other towns, in other banks, being told in subtle and not so subtle ways that they didn't belong, and most of them wouldn't have Maya or a notebook or a father who could bring executives to their knees. So, as she looked around the room, at the discomfort, the shame, the apologies, Layla made a quiet promise to herself. This would not end in this room. This was just where it began. Talia Reeves. The regional director rose from her chair. "I've seen enough," she said. Her voice had the finality of Judgment Day. She turned to Clarissa Whitmore. "You are terminated effective immediately. Your actions violated corporate ethics, civil rights policies, and basic human decency." Then to Garrett Langford. "Expect federal charges to be filed. You will not do business with this institution or any of its subsidiaries ever again." She paused. "And I assure you, our legal department is already preparing its response." Then she turned to Maya Lin. "There is one employee in this branch who demonstrated courage and integrity today." Maya blinked. "Me?" "Yes," Talia said. "Your action may have violated policy, Anita, but it upheld our values. You put a child's safety above protocol. That's the kind of leadership we need." Maya's eyes filled with tears. Then finally, Talia turned to Layla. "Miss Carter, on behalf of Sterling Financial Group, I owe you an apology. Not because of who your father is, but because of what you endured. You were failed by this institution today, but you have reminded us what justice looks like, what accountability means." In that moment, something shifted. Not just inside the bank, but within each person present. Layla had not only forced them to look at the truth, she had reminded them that change starts when one person refuses to be invisible, and she had made herself unmissable. The story has shifted. This is no longer just about injustice. It's about transformation. Layla is no longer just a victim. She is a symbol. When one door closes, another opens, but sometimes that door doesn't open by luck. Sometimes you kick it open yourself. The fallout from the scandal at Sterling National Bank made headlines across the country. What had begun as a humiliating experience for a young student had unraveled into one of the largest internal investigations in the institution's history. The footage, the discrimination, the corporate espionage. It had shaken the foundation of the bank, and every employee, board member, and shareholder knew it. But in the days that followed, something surprising began to bloom from the wreckage. Opportunity. And at the center of it stood Layla Carter. The shift. Less than a week after the incident, Dr. Malcolm Carter held a press conference outside Sterling's corporate headquarters. Dozens of reporters gathered as he stepped up to the podium, flanked not by lawyers or board members, but by his daughter. Layla stood to his right, notebook in hand, dressed in the same school uniform she had worn that day at the bank. "My daughter is not here today as a victim," Malcolm began, his voice calm but unwavering. "She is here as a witness, and more importantly, as a catalyst." He turned slightly toward her. She did what many adults in that room refused to do. She observed. She stood firm. She documented. And in doing so, she helped expose a culture of exclusion and systemic bias that would have otherwise gone unchecked. The cameras clicked furiously, but it wasn't just Malcolm's words that made headlines. It was what he announced next. The initiative. In response to the incident, Dr. Carter continued, our foundation is launching a nationwide youth banking initiative called Access, achieving confidence, character, and equality through student savings. The crowd leaned in. This program will offer financial literacy workshops, scholarship programs, and early savings accounts for students aged 12 to 18. And it will be built, not on assumptions, but on education, empowerment, and inclusion. A pause, then he added, and the first person appointed to the advisory panel is my daughter. Layla blinked in shock. That part hadn't been discussed. I think you've earned it, her father said with a smile, placing his hand on her shoulder. The crowd erupted with applause. A new voice. In the weeks that followed, Layla's name spread beyond headlines. She was invited to speak at student forums, school district meetings, and even a televised town hall on race and economics hosted by a major news network. But Layla never approached any of it like someone chasing the spotlight. She always brought her notebook. When asked how she stayed so composed during the hours she spent standing alone in the bank, she gave the same answer every time. I focused on what I could control. I watched. I listened. I wrote. Because when people try to erase your presence, writing yourself back into the narrative is the most powerful thing you can do. Her words resonated, not just with students, but with educators, bankers, parents, and policymakers. Maya's rise. While Layla's platform grew, someone else's quiet courage was also recognized. Maya Lynn, the young teller who had risked her job by handing Layla her personal phone, received a call from Talia Reeves just days after Clarissa Whitmore's dismissal. We're restructuring the branch, Talia had said, and I'd like to offer you the position of Customer Experience Manager. Maya nearly dropped the phone. But I broke protocol, she replied. No, Talia responded. You broke silence. And in doing so, you upheld everything this bank was supposed to stand for. Maya accepted the offer. On her first day in the new role, she removed the small name tag she'd worn as a teller and replaced it with a new plaque above her desk. It read, Maya Lynn, Customer Experience Manager. Service should never be silent. And she meant every word. From corner to center. 3 months later, Layla walked into an auditorium packed with students, parents, and educators. It was the opening day of the Youth Empowerment Financial Conference, and she was the keynote speaker. This time, she wore jeans and sneakers, no uniform, no podium, just her voice and her story. She stood center stage with a mic in one hand and her leather notebook in the other. When I first walked into that bank, I was proud. I had earned something. I had goals, but I was told, without words, that I didn't belong. So I stood in a corner, and while they tried to ignore me, I wrote everything. Because when you write something down, it becomes real. And when it's real, people can no longer pretend it didn't happen. Her words landed like truth bombs in the silent room. This isn't just about race or age or money. It's about dignity. And that's something no one should have to earn. It should be given freely to every person who walks into a place of business, a school, or a community. She paused. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be loud. You don't even need to be old enough to vote. You just need to be brave enough to stand and still enough to watch. And when you see something wrong, write it down. Because the world doesn't change with anger. It changes with clarity. The audience was silent. Then it stood, in full, a standing ovation. Her father stood in the back clapping, pride gleaming in his eyes. An unlikely friendship. After the conference, Layla found Maya waiting for her backstage. I have something for you, Maya said. She handed Layla a gift-wrapped box. Inside was a new leather-bound journal, similar in design to Layla's own, but engraved on the cover were the words, Truth has a voice. Layla smiled, running her fingers across the letters. You gave me a voice that day, Layla said. No, Maya replied. You already had it. I just made sure someone else could hear it. The two shared a quiet moment. It was the kind of moment born not from growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in corners where no one's watching, and you refuse to disappear. It had been exactly 6 months since that day at Sterling National Bank. 6 months since Layla Carter stood silently in a corner, treated as if she were invisible. 6 months since she exposed discrimination, uncovered corporate betrayal, and held an entire institution accountable. Not with anger, but with truth. Now, at just 15 years old, Layla had become something she never intended to be, a national voice in the conversation around youth empowerment and financial equity. But she wasn't interested in being a symbol. She wanted to understand. She wanted to grow. She wanted to build something real. Back to normal, or something like it. Returning to Westwood Preparatory Academy had been strange at first. The same halls, the same classes, the same textbooks, but everything felt different. Students whispered when she passed. Teachers smiled with unfamiliar deference. Some classmates avoided her, unsure whether to treat her like a friend or a celebrity. But Layla didn't carry herself like someone special. She still sat in the front row of every class, still kept her notebook by her side, still raised her hand with calm certainty. What changed was how she listened. She noticed the quiet kids in the back, those who were often dismissed or talked over. She remembered how it felt to be spoken around instead of to. So now she made space. She invited people in. She passed the mic when no one else would. A new kind of student. In history class, Layla didn't just memorize dates. She asked about the people left out of the stories. In math, she connected financial literacy to real-life consequences in underserved communities. In literature, she challenged the assumption that only certain narratives were worth reading aloud. At first, some teachers were taken aback, but soon they adjusted. Then they leaned in. Then they asked her to lead. Layla found herself mentoring other students, especially younger girls who reminded her of herself. Quiet, focused, sharp as glass but afraid to shine. She showed them how to keep a journal, how to structure a persuasive argument, how to sit with discomfort and turn it into power. But most of all, she taught them this. You don't have to yell to be heard. You just have to say something worth listening to. Building bridges, not walls. While her profile grew nationally, Layla was careful to stay rooted in the why behind everything. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was building bridges between youth and adults, between policy and empathy, between silence and change. She began attending community banking forums, sitting alongside executives and lawmakers twice her age. At first, they treated her like a novelty, but then she spoke, and the room changed. If banks can create policies that prevent kids from cashing legitimate checks, she once said at a roundtable, then banks can create policies to protect them too. This isn't about exceptions, it's about expectations. They started to listen. A shift in her father, Dr. Malcolm Carter, once the towering figure in Layla's world, now looked at his daughter with a humility he rarely showed in public. Not because he was surprised by her, but because he finally saw her completely. At home, their conversations became deeper, more mutual, less about lectures, more about exchange. They discussed policy, strategy, human behavior. He asked her opinion on staff hires. She challenged him on outdated assumptions. And together, they created something new, a youth advisory council within the Carter Foundation, made up entirely of teens from diverse backgrounds, tasked with shaping the future of financial education and access. Layla didn't want to be the only voice. She wanted a choir. Transformation over titles. Despite all the awards, interviews, and invitations, Layla remained grounded. She didn't want to be called an activist. She didn't want to be called a hero. She wanted to be useful, and that, more than anything, was what made her powerful. She didn't seek to shame the world. She sought to educate it. She didn't want to burn it all down. She wanted to rebuild it, fairer, stronger, smarter. And she did it the same way she'd faced that first day in the bank. Quietly, intentionally, with her eyes open and her pen moving. in a full circle. One quiet evening, Layla found herself sitting alone on the back steps of her school, watching the sunset stain the sky in streaks of gold and lavender. In her hands was a letter. It was from a 12-year-old girl named Jasmine, who had seen Layla's town hall speech online. "I used to be scared to go into banks with my mom," the letter read, "but now I want to learn how they work, maybe even work in one. Thank you for making me feel like I belong somewhere I didn't think I ever could." Layla pressed the paper to her chest, her eyes stinging with tears. Not of pain, but of purpose. Because the truest measure of growth isn't how far you rise. It's how many people you reach on the way up. Layla Carter has grown, not just in influence, but in wisdom, empathy, and purpose. She is no longer just the girl in the corner. She is the voice at the table, the bridge across silence, and the light guiding others toward justice. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with action. The autumn air carried a quiet chill as golden leaves floated across the steps of Westwood Preparatory Academy. Inside the school's historic auditorium, every seat was filled. Students, parents, community leaders, even a few city officials, all gathered for one final event before the school year's end, the Carter Youth Legacy Forum. The name had sparked debate at first. Layla herself had hesitated. "It shouldn't be named after me," she told her father. "It was never just about me." But Dr. Malcolm Carter had insisted. "You didn't just expose something, Layla. You transformed something, and it's time the world recognized that." The final speech. As she stood behind the microphone, the spotlight casting a warm circle around her, Layla Carter didn't feel powerful. She felt grateful. Grateful that the moment which once humiliated her had led to something bigger than the pain. Grateful that the world had seen not just what happened, but why it mattered. Grateful that her voice had found echoes in thousands of others. She took a breath. The room fell silent. 6 months ago, I stood in the corner of a bank for nearly 4 hours. I wasn't loud, I wasn't violent, I was just invisible. But I wrote everything down, because when you don't have a voice in the room, your pen becomes your voice. And that voice became a record, and that record became a reckoning. Layla paused. Her fingers curled around her old leather notebook. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about reflection. It's about what happens when you choose to see, not just yourself, but everyone else who's been told they don't belong. Everyone deserves dignity, not because of their last name, not because of how much money they have, but because they Sterling National reborn. Meanwhile, Sterling National Bank, once the symbol of exclusion, had begun a slow but deliberate transformation. Its flagship branch in Larkridge was remodeled. Gone were the velvet ropes dividing VIP clients from standard ones. Gone were the promotional posters of smiling, all-white families. In their place, murals created by local high school artists, a community finance hub, and, most importantly, a plaque. It hung near the new entrance. This space is dedicated to Layla Carter, whose quiet courage changed our institution forever. May every client, every teller, and every leader remember, respect isn't earned, it's owed. Many who entered never read the plaque, but for those who did, it changed how they walked into that space. One final moment. One crisp morning, as Layla waited at a coffee shop across from her school, she noticed a young black girl, perhaps 11, stepping hesitantly into the bank across the street with her mother. Layla watched as the teller welcomed them warmly. No tension, no dismissal, just respect. Layla smiled to herself, not because she thought she'd fixed anything, but because she knew that one small thing had shifted. And once something shifts, it never goes back the same. The story of Layla Carter doesn't end in applause. It continues in the actions of everyone she's inspired, in every youth who dares to write things down, in every adult who chooses to listen, in every corner that finally becomes a seat at the table. Life lesson Sometimes the most powerful voices come from the quietest corners. Layla Carter never planned to become a symbol. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. All she did was stand